When the police cars pulled up to Maple Street with their sirens wailing, every curtain on the block twitched open. What happened next exposed a truth so ugly, so systematically orchestrated, that it would split our quiet suburban neighborhood down the middle and change everything I thought I knew about the place I called home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, but it wasn't supposed to end that way. According to Margaret Chen, the block party coordinator and unofficial queen of Pine Ridge Estates, my children were simply not a good fit for the annual neighborhood celebration. Those were her exact words, delivered with the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, standing on my doorstep like she was doing me a favor. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and 3 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream. My husband Miguel and I had saved for 15 years to buy our house on Maple Street in Pine Ridge Estates, one of those cookie-cutter developments, where the lawns are always green and the mailboxes all match. We chose this neighborhood specifically for our kids. Sofia, 12, with her infectious laugh and honor roll certificates covering our refrigerator, and Diego, 8, who could make friends with a telephone pole and spent his afternoons teaching. Neighborhood dogs knew tricks. I grew up in a cramped apartment above my grandmother's bakery on the east side of the city. 4 generations crammed into 3 bedrooms, the smell of fresh bread mixing with the sound of too many voices speaking Spanish and broken English all at once. Don't get me wrong, I loved that life, loved the warmth and chaos and the way everyone looked out for each other. But Miguel and I wanted something different for Sofia and Diego. We wanted them to have space to breathe, good schools, and neighbors who knew their names. Pine Ridge Estates seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained, parks, block parties that brought everyone together. The realtor, a bubbly woman named Jessica, had walked us through the neighborhood pointing out families with children, talking about the tight-knit community spirit. "You'll love it here," she said, gesturing toward a group of kids playing soccer in someone's front yard. "Everyone looks out for each other." And for the first few months, that seemed true. Sofia made friends quickly. She has her father's easy charm and her grandmother's gift for making everyone feel included. She'd come home with stories about lunch tables and study groups and sleepovers being planned. Diego, with his boundless energy and collection of soccer balls, became the unofficial entertainment committee for the neighborhood kids. I'd watch him from our kitchen window, running around with children whose names I was still learning, and feel something I hadn't expected: belonging. The mothers were friendly enough. Casual waves across driveways, quick chats at the mailbox, the kind of surface-level pleasantries that make a place feel safe. Margaret Chen was always the most visible, organizing everything from the community garden to the holiday light contest. She lived in the biggest house on the corner, a sprawling colonial with rose bushes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. She was the type of woman who remembered everyone's anniversaries and organized meal trains when someone got sick. But there was something about the way she looked at my family that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was when she complimented my exotic garden, where I was growing the tomatoes and peppers my mother had taught me to tend. Maybe it was how she'd ask if Diego was always so energetic, when he was just being a normal 8-year-old boy. Or how she'd pause just a beat too long when Sofia mentioned our weekend trips to visit my family, like she was calculating something in her head. But I pushed those feelings aside. I told myself I was being too sensitive, reading into things that weren't there. This was our fresh start, our chance to build something new. I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin it. The block party was scheduled for the first Saturday in October. It was Pine Ridge's biggest event, the thing everyone talked about for months. Margaret had been planning it since July, sending around sign-up sheets for food contributions and volunteer duties. She'd stopped by my house twice to discuss our participation, and both times I'd been enthusiastic. We'd bring my grandmother's empanadas, I told her. Sofia could help with face painting. Diego would love the games. She'd nodded and smiled and written everything down in her color-coded planner. "How wonderful," she'd said. "We love having diverse contributions." The word diverse stuck with me, but I forced myself to take it as a compliment. 3 weeks before the party, I started getting strange looks. Margaret's usual waves became curt nods. Other mothers who used to chat at the school pickup line seemed suddenly busy with their phones. At first, I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, forgotten some social rule I didn't know existed. I asked Sofia if anything had happened at school, but she just shrugged and said everyone was acting weird lately. Then came the first sign that something was seriously wrong. Diego came home from playing at the park in tears. "They said I can't play anymore," he sobbed into my shoulder. "They said their mom said I'm too rough." Too rough. My Diego, who apologized profusely if he accidentally knocked down another child's block tower, who gave up his turn at bat if someone smaller wanted to play. Too rough. I marched to the park the next day and watched from a distance. Diego was playing with his usual gentleness, sharing his toys, helping younger kids reach the monkey bars. But I noticed something else. The other parents were watching him like hawks, hovering closer than usual, calling their children away whenever games got too energetic. And it wasn't just Diego. Sofia mentioned that her study group had suddenly filled up when she tried to join. The isolation was surgical, precise, and completely deniable. I tried talking to Miguel about it, but he'd had his own experiences. His attempts to join the neighborhood's weekend soccer game had been met with polite excuses about regulars only. The community barbecue invitation he'd received had been mysteriously lost, though everyone else seemed to know about it. Still, he kept saying maybe we were imagining things. Maybe it would blow over. But it didn't blow over. It escalated. 2 weeks before the block party, I was checking our mail when I overheard Margaret talking to her next-door neighbor, Linda Walsh. They didn't see me behind Miguel's truck, and their voices carried clearly in the evening air. "I just think we need to be careful," Margaret was saying. "The neighborhood has a certain character. We've worked hard to maintain that." "But the kids seem nice enough," Linda replied, though her voice sounded uncertain. "It's not about nice, it's about fit. Some families just don't understand our traditions, our values. And frankly, Linda, their parties are getting louder. The music, the language, it's changing the whole atmosphere." My blood ran cold. Our parties. We'd had exactly 2 family gatherings since moving in. My nephew's graduation celebration and my mother's birthday. Both had been weekend afternoons with traditional Mexican music, and yes, conversations in Spanish because that's what felt natural with my extended family. The music hadn't been loud. We'd been conscious of our neighbors. But apparently that didn't matter. "I don't know, Margaret. Aren't we being a little—" "I'm not saying anything discriminatory," Margaret cut her off. "I'm just saying this. Block party has been a tradition for 15 years. We have a certain way of doing things. Some people fit into that framework, and others—" She let the sentence hang. I stood frozen behind the truck, my hands shaking as I gripped the mail. This wasn't about Diego being too rough or Sofia being too social. This was about us being too Mexican, too loud, too different. This was about them deciding we didn't belong before we'd ever really had a chance to try. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Margaret's words, wondering how many other conversations like that had happened while I was busy trying to fit in. I thought about all the times I'd second-guessed my cooking, my clothes, my children's perfectly normal behavior, trying to mold us into something we weren't. But I also thought about Sofia's excitement about the block party, how she'd been planning. Her face-painting designs for weeks, how Diego had been practicing 3-legged races in our backyard, how this was supposed to be their first real neighborhood tradition, the thing that would make them feel like they truly belonged here. I decided to keep quiet and see what happened. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Margaret's comments weren't as malicious as they'd sounded. Maybe everything would work out fine. The Tuesday before the block party, Margaret knocked on my door. She was holding her ever-present clipboard and wearing that smile again, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Carmen," she said warmly, like we were old friends, "I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to talk about this weekend." "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Sofia and Diego are so excited. We finished the empanadas yesterday. I made extra, just in case." Her smile flickered. "About that. I've been thinking, and I feel terrible about this, but I'm worried there might be some confusion at the party." "Confusion?" "Well, you know how these things are. Lots of people, lots of energy. And with Diego being so spirited, and the language barrier with some of your family members who might be coming." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "My family speaks English, Margaret, and Diego isn't spirited. He's 8 years old." She waved her hand dismissively. Of course. I just think maybe this year it would be best if your family had a quiet day at home. Let the neighborhood have its traditional celebration, and maybe next year we can figure out a better way to integrate everyone." Integrate. Like we were some kind of foreign element that needed to be processed slowly, carefully, so as not to disrupt the delicate ecosystem of Pine Ridge Estates. "Are you uninviting my children from the block party?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. "Not uninviting. Just suggesting that maybe this year isn't the right time. You understand." I stared at her, this woman who organized meal trains and remembered birthdays, who had smiled at my children and complimented my garden, who was now standing in my living room telling me that my family wasn't welcome at a community event because we didn't fit her idea of what the neighborhood should look like. "No," I said quietly. "I don't understand, but thank you for making it clear." She looked taken aback by my response, like she'd expected me to nod and smile and agree that, yes, of course, we'd stay home and be good immigrants who knew their place. "Carmen, I hope you won't make this difficult. The party committee has already made its decision." "The party committee, you mean you?" "I mean the people who have been organizing this event since before you moved here. People who understand the neighborhood." That night, I cried. Not the angry tears I'd expected, but something deeper. Grief, maybe. For the dream of belonging that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. For my children, who would have to learn that sometimes the world decides you don't fit before you've even had a chance to try. For myself, for believing that moving to a nicer neighborhood would somehow protect us from the kind of discrimination I thought we'd left behind. Miguel held me and said all the right things about how Margaret was just one person, how there were other neighbors who'd been kind to us, how we'd build our own traditions. But I could see it in his eyes too. The hurt, the disappointment, the realization that our American dream had come with terms and conditions we'd never been told about. The morning of the block party arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd told Sofia and Diego about Margaret's decision as gently as I could, explaining that some people weren't ready for new neighbors yet, that it wasn't their fault, that we'd have our own special day instead. Sofia had tried to hide her tears, asking if there was something wrong with her face painting designs. Diego had just looked confused, asking why Mrs. Chen didn't want him to play games anymore. We tried to make the best of it. I set up a movie marathon in the living room, made popcorn, let them stay in their pajamas all day. But every sound from outside, the laughter, the music, the announcements over Margaret's rented microphone, was a reminder of what we'd been excluded from. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of our neighbors were across the street at the party. I opened the door to find Officer Patricia Williams standing on my doorstep, her police car parked in my driveway. My heart jumped into my throat. As a woman of color in America, any unexpected police visit sets off alarm bells, especially with everything that had been happening in our neighborhood lately. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" she asked, consulting her notepad. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Williams. I'm here about a complaint we received regarding today's block party." My stomach dropped. "A complaint?" "Yes, ma'am. Someone called about a disturbance at this address. Said there was loud music, large crowds, public intoxication. They were concerned about public safety." I stared at her in disbelief. "Officer, my children and I have been inside all day watching movies. We're not even at the block party." She looked confused, glancing from her notepad to the clearly quiet house behind me, then across the street where the actual block party was in full swing. "You're not. This is 247 Maple Street, correct?" "Yes, but we're not participating in the block party. We weren't invited." Officer Williams frowned, looking back at her notes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify some information. Can I come in?" And that's when everything began to unravel in a way none of us could have predicted. I let Officer Williams into my living room, where Sofia and Diego were curled up on the couch with blankets and bowls of popcorn. They looked up with wide eyes at the uniformed woman entering our space. "Kids, why don't you go play in your rooms for a bit?" I suggested gently. They gathered their snacks and disappeared upstairs, though I could hear Diego's door crack open. Slightly. He was probably listening. Officer Williams sat down and pulled out her notepad. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I received a complaint about loud music and rowdy behavior at this address. But I've been here 5 minutes, and it's clear that's not accurate. Can you tell me what's going on?" So I did. I told her everything. About Margaret's comments overheard in the driveway, about the gradual isolation of my children, about being uninvited from the block party because we didn't fit the neighborhood character, about how we'd spent the day quietly inside while everyone else celebrated across the street. Officer Williams listened without interruption, taking notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe you've been targeted because of your race or ethnicity?" The question hung in the air. It was the thing I'd been dancing around for weeks, the truth I'd been afraid to name even to myself. "Yes," I said simply. "I think that's exactly what this is." She nodded slowly. "I'm going to be honest with you. We've been getting calls about this neighborhood for weeks. Different complaints about your family, noise violations, property infractions, suspicious activity. All anonymous, all unsubstantiated. When we check them out. Today's call was different, though." "How so?" The caller gave a name. Margaret Chen. Said she was calling on behalf of the neighborhood association about public safety concerns at your address during the block party. My blood went cold. Margaret had actually called the police on us, not for anything we'd done, but just to harass us, to make our lives difficult. "The thing is," Officer Williams continued, "I've been a police officer for 12 years. I've seen this pattern before. What you're describing, the systematic exclusion, the false complaints, it's a form of harassment, and filing false police reports is a crime." Just then, we heard voices outside growing louder. Officer Williams and I both looked toward the window. "Stay here," she said, standing up. "I need to make some calls." I watched from the window as she walked across the street toward the block party. The festivities seemed to dim as people noticed the police car in my driveway, then watched Officer Williams approach the main group. What happened next was like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Officer Williams went straight to Margaret, who was standing near the food table with her clipboard. I could see Margaret's face change from confusion to alarm as Officer Williams began speaking to her. Other neighbors started gathering around, craning their necks to hear. Then Margaret did something that sealed her fate completely. She pointed across the street at my house and said something that made several people step back from her in obvious shock. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see their reactions. Officer Williams returned to my house 20 minutes later, but she wasn't alone. She was followed by 3 neighbors: Linda Walsh, the woman I'd heard defending us to Margaret; James Patterson, a black man who lived 2 streets over and had always been friendly to my kids; and surprisingly, Jessica, the realtor who'd sold us the house. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Officer Williams said, "these people have some things they'd like to tell you about what's been happening in your neighborhood." Linda spoke first, wringing her hands nervously. "Carmen, I am so sorry. I should have spoken up earlier. Margaret has been organizing a campaign against your family since you moved in. She started small, suggesting people avoid play dates, commenting about maintaining neighborhood standards. But it got worse after you had those family gatherings." James stepped forward. She approached several of us about signing a petition to create new community guidelines that would restrict loud music in large gatherings. When I read between the lines, it was clearly targeted at your cultural celebrations. I refused to sign, but others did. "Margaret told everyone that you were troublemakers," Linda continued. "She said your children were aggressive, that your family didn't respect property lines, that you were bringing down home values. She organized the other mothers to exclude your kids from play dates and activities." Jessica looked mortified. I had no idea any of this was happening. When Officer Williams called me about false advertising and potential fair housing violations, I came immediately. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what these people did to your family is illegal. It's housing discrimination based on national origin and race." Officer Williams nodded. Mrs. Chen admitted to filing multiple false reports. She also admitted to organizing what essentially amounts to a harassment campaign. But here's what really did her in. When I asked her about the block party exclusion, she said, and I quote, "Some people just don't understand American values. We can't have every cultural celebration disrupting our traditional community." She said that in front of everyone, Linda added, looking ashamed. People started getting uncomfortable. A few families actually left the party after that. I felt like I was in a daze. All those weeks of self-doubt, of wondering if I was being too sensitive, of trying to change myself and my children to fit in better. It had all been real. The discrimination, the harassment, the systematic exclusion. "What happens now?" I asked. Officer Williams consulted her notes. "Mrs. Chen will be charged with filing false police reports and harassment. The DA's office will review the case for possible civil rights violations. As for the neighborhood association, they'll need to answer some serious questions about their practices." Over the next hour, more neighbors came to my door. Some to apologize, some to share their own experiences with Margaret's manipulations, others to express outrage that they'd been unknowingly participating in discrimination. The Patel family from 2 blocks over revealed that Margaret had approached them with concerns about our family's gatherings. The Johnsons, who were black, shared that Margaret had made similar comments about their teenage son being intimidating when he walked through the neighborhood. But what moved me most was when Mrs. Elena Kowalski, an elderly Polish woman I'd barely spoken to, shuffled over with tears in her eyes. "In 1952, I came to this country with nothing," she said in heavily accented English. "Neighbors like Margaret, they said I didn't belong. My food smelled wrong. My accent was too thick. I'm ashamed I didn't see what she was doing to you. No one should have to hide who they are to belong." As the afternoon wore on, the original block party dispersed and reformed in my front yard. Neighbors brought their food platters. Someone set up speakers. And suddenly the community gathering Margaret had tried to exclude us from was happening right here. Sofia and Diego emerged from the house cautiously at first, then with growing excitement as children ran up to them apologizing for the weird behavior and asking if they wanted to play. Diego's 3-legged race practice finally paid off, and Sofia set up her face painting station on our front porch. Margaret never apologized. She stayed inside her house while police processed her formal complaint and neighbors talked openly about the division she'd created. Linda later told me that Margaret had sent a group text saying she was disappointed in the neighborhood's lack of standards and was considering moving. That evening, as the impromptu party wound down, James Patterson approached me with a serious expression. "Carmen, we want you to know that what happened here isn't okay with most of us. We're going to make some changes, starting with the neighborhood association leadership." "That's not necessary," I began, but he held up his hand. "It is necessary. Margaret abused her position to target your family. That's not who we want representing our community. We're calling a meeting next week to elect new leadership and establish clear anti-discrimination policies." A week later, the neighborhood association held its most attended meeting in years. Margaret didn't show up, but her supporters were vocal in defending what they called maintaining community character. It got heated with people taking sides, but in the end, a new leadership was elected with Linda Walsh as president. The new association's first act was to establish a community covenant explicitly prohibiting discrimination and harassment. The second was to organize a monthly cultural celebration where families could share their traditions, foods, and customs with neighbors. Margaret put her house on the market 2 months later. On the day she moved out, I was watering my garden when she walked to her car one last time. She paused at our shared property line and looked at me for a long moment. "I hope you know I was never trying to be cruel," she said finally. "I just wanted to preserve what we had here." I looked at her, this woman who had caused so much pain to my family in the name of preservation. "What you wanted to preserve," I said quietly, "was never worth keeping." She got in her car and drove away. I never saw her again. The Hendersons, a young interracial couple with twin toddlers, bought Margaret's house. At their welcome party, I watched Diego teach the twins how to kick a soccer ball while Sofia braided flowers into one of the little girl's hair. The yard was full of families, black, white, Latino, Asian, mixed, all talking and laughing together. This is what community was supposed to look like. 6 months later, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not from Margaret, but from a woman named Rosa living in a nearby development. She'd heard about our story through mutual friends and wanted to thank me for speaking up. "My family has been dealing with similar issues," she wrote. "Your courage to fight back gave us the strength to stand up for ourselves. We're meeting with a civil rights attorney next week. Thank you for showing us we don't have to accept discrimination in silence." That's when I understood that this story was bigger than just my family, bigger than just our block. It was about every family who's been made to feel like they don't belong. Every child who's been excluded from play. Every parent who's been made to question whether their culture, their language, their celebrations make them less worthy of community. I kept that letter on my refrigerator next to Sofia's honor roll certificates and Diego's soccer team photo. A reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to disappear. The truth about why my kids were banned from the block party wasn't complicated. It wasn't about noise or behavior or community standards. It was about fear. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of a community that included everyone. But here's what Margaret and people like her don't understand. Diversity isn't something that dilutes a community. It strengthens it. When we share our traditions, our languages, our celebrations, we don't lose what makes us special. We multiply it. Today, Pine Ridge Estates is a different place. Children play together regardless of their background. Neighbors check on each other in multiple languages. Our block parties feature empanadas alongside hamburgers, mariachi music alongside pop songs, and face painting designs from around the world. And every time I see Sofia teaching a friend how to make papel picado or Diego organizing an inclusive game of soccer, I remember why fighting for belonging matters. Not just for our families, but for the children who come after us. who deserve to grow up in communities where different doesn't mean dangerous, where culture is celebrated rather than hidden. That's the real story of why my kids were banned from the block party. And that's why I'll never stop fighting for the right to belong, exactly as we are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.